Hello, and thank you for joining us. President Trump is doubling down on his criticisms of the judicial branch. Since the president took office, there have been several cases of federal judges temporarily stopping the administration from dismantling agencies or firing government employees. Plaintiffs, such as employee unions and nonprofits, have questioned the legality of these moves, many of which are still being argued in court. But the White House's legal battles went a step further over the weekend after the administration did not turn around flights to El Salvador carrying alleged gang members, despite a judge's verbal order to do so. The administration argues it did not break any laws because the judge didn't put his order demanding the planes to return to the U.S. in writing. And because the planes were already over international waters, where, according to the DOJ, the judge no longer had jurisdiction. The president says the judge in that case should be impeached. He wrote in a Truth Social post early Wednesday, quote, "If a president doesn't have the right to throw murderers and other criminals out of our country because a radical left lunatic judge wants to assume the role of president, then our country is in very big trouble and destined to fail." White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reiterated that view at Wednesday's briefing.
The judges in this country are acting erroneously. We have judges who are acting as partisan activists from the bench. They are trying to dictate policy from the President of the United States. They are trying to clearly slow walk this administration's agenda, and it's unacceptable.
We're closely following developments on the war in Ukraine as well. President Trump spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky Wednesday, one day after speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cortez joins us now. Nancy, the White House, again, back to that issue of partisan judges. They say are partisan judges. The president also says the judge in the deportation case should be impeached. Is this mostly rhetoric, or do you get a sense this is part of a bigger fight brewing?
Well, President Trump has railed against judges who rule in ways that he doesn't want them to for years. In his personal cases that he has faced, in a lot of election cases that he has brought. So in a way, it's nothing new. But what is different here is that he is actively pushing for this particular judge, Judge Boasberg, to be impeached. And even though the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who is a conservative, Justice John Roberts, has basically come out and said, hey, that's not the way to deal with a ruling by a judge that you don't like. You can always appeal it and take it up the chain. But President Trump is saying, I respect Justice Roberts, but I still think this judge, other activist judges, in his words, should be impeached. And we're just learning tonight that that Elon Musk, the head of DOJ, a very close ally of this president, has actually donated to a handful of Republican lawmakers who support legislation to impeach judges like this one, who they believe are overreaching. The bottom line is the White House says that these judges are after Trump personally and that they have issued more injunctions against his moves than they have against any other president. But the reality is that President Trump is making more moves and using novel legal justification for those moves than any other president. And so it's perhaps not surprising that he's facing more judicial pushback.
President Trump spoke with Zelensky, as we mentioned. What are we hearing from the White House about the call, and where do peace talks go from here?
They say that the call was a good one, that Trump and Zelensky are on the same page, that more talks, technical talks about how exactly they go from this partial ceasefire, where the two sides are agreeing not to strike the other side's infrastructure, to what they see as the next step, which is a ceasefire that applies to the Black Sea, and then a 30-day full ceasefire. They say that those talks are going to continue in Saudi Arabia. And interestingly, the White House made clear today that they are going to continue to share military intelligence and military aid with Ukraine a day after Russia made it clear that it would not support a ceasefire if the aid and the intelligence sharing, not only by the U.S., but by the rest of the world, weren't ceased as well.
All right, Nancy Cortez, thank you. The federal judge who ordered the administration to turn around those deportation flights to El Salvador is giving the administration another day to provide details on the flights. Judge James Boasberg granted the extension earlier Wednesday after Justice Department officials indicate they may claim state secrets privilege to keep the details private. CBS News Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now. Scott, can you explain what state secrets privilege is and why the government thinks it may apply here?
Yeah, the government's making the argument that releasing all the information the judges asked for could compromise their ability to combat terrorism and combat these drug cartels. But some of what they're arguing is immaterial to what the judge is saying here. The judge is saying, I've ordered you to do things, you're disregarding the orders. There's a proper way of disagreeing with orders. That's to appeal it, not to disobey the orders of the court. So that's a fundamental dispute that was to be ironed out by 12 p.m. Eastern time today. That was the deadline the judge set for the Department of Justice to answer his specific questions about how this all went down last weekend. The Department of Justice defied that order, didn't respond to the questions, asking instead for further postponements. The judge agreed to postpone it till tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern. He wants the answers then. It's unclear if that information is going to be handed over, but Lindsay, you see where this is headed. This type of standoff and dispute between the administration and the courts is not just a potential constitutional crisis, but one retired judge told CBS News today it's the start of one.
I want you to pull on that thread a little bit further. But first, what have we heard from the judge in response to the government's arguments? And in terms of that fear of a constitutional crisis, I mean, right now, the evidence is suggesting that the executive branch is falling in line with what the judicial branch is saying, right? So these are more fears about what could possibly be to come if this rhetoric becomes something other than that.
Yeah, the judge in his order today, Lindsay, echoed what the Chief Justice of the United States said last night, that the proper system, the proper sequence of events, if you disagree with the judge's ruling, is to appeal it, not to disobey it. In fact, Justice Roberts last night said you can't just impeach a judge because you disagree with the judge, trying to reinstitute some norms here. But this has been shattering norms. And here are two things we can report as the evening begins here in Washington. An appeals court has set a Monday 1:30 p.m. Eastern time hearing on the Department of Justice's appeal of what the judge has ordered here. That is the proper sequence of affairs. But in the meantime, the judge still wants answers to what time the planes took off. When did they leave U.S. airspace? When did all of this happen vis-a-vis the actual landing of the flight in El Salvador Saturday evening? And as the evening began here in Washington, he did not get the answers, the timeline he ordered.
In a separate case, Scott, a judge ruled Tuesday that Elon Musk's efforts to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, is likely unconstitutional. President Trump says he'll appeal. Where does this leave the agency for now?
In a constant state of flux, seemingly, for the U.S. Agency for International Development. There have been twists and turns in this legal battle, and former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, speaking exclusively with CBS News tonight, says this is actually a national security concern. If you hollow out or make uncertain the road ahead for this agency, which helps with international relations and helping our partner countries across the world. But that notwithstanding, Lindsay, it's just one of 140 plus legal challenges filed against the Trump administration since January 20th. And you can see now why, Lindsay, this battle between judge and administration so critical, with the courts being such a firewall at this moment in time.
140 plus cases?
So far, with more coming each day.
Scott MacFarlane, thank you.